You waste time. Like, here's a good question for you guys. How many of you waste more than 4 hours a day? Okay. So I would say the reason you do that is because you haven't really faced the reality of your own death. If you had done that, you would stop doing that. You would not waste time. You know, and we could do a quick economic analysis. I like to do this with people. So what do you think your time's worth an hour? Guess. We know it's at least $10, right? Because that's minimum wage. Well, so the minimum value society puts on your labor is $10 an hour. Okay, but you know, you're smart and healthy and young, and so each hour is an investment in the future, so it has to be considered in that manner, because one of your hours is worth more to you than one of my hours is worth to me, because you have so much of your future life still depending on it. So that's a big deal. So I would say $50 an hour is probably reasonable for what you guys are worth. It's somewhere between 10 and 50 anyways. So, you know, let's assume 50. Okay, it's $200 a day. It's $1,400 a week. It's $5,600 a month. $65,000 a year. It's like, you want to waste it? Go right ahead. But that's what it's costing you, at minimum. You know, and you know, you might think, well, no, because I'm not getting paid. It's like, wrong. You're paid for your studies. You just get paid 10 years from now. It's just deferred income. And there's a huge difference between people who have B's and A's. You know, like B's, doors shut. A's, doors open. And so, you know, you waste that time, you will bloody pay for it. And you don't get it back either. So, you know, if you're awake and you know that this is waiting for you and that there's only so much time you have, that can bloody well wake you up and stop you from wasting your time because you don't have that much of it. This is a medieval representation it's a very strange representation, obviously, because it's a crucifix and has a snake on it. It's not, but it's a tree snake thing, you know. And it's actually an echo. There's a story in the Old Testament about Moses leading his people through the desert, and it's sort of a, you know, they've escaped from tyranny, so that's the previous place of order. Now they're in chaos because they've left tyranny, so they're all wandering around sort of without their heads. They don't know which way they're going. They're trying to run away from something that's bad and towards something that's good, but they don't know where they are, and so they get all kind of, you know, fighty and break into factions, and then they start worshipping false gods like golden calves and so on. It's fragmentation under pressure, right? And so God gets irritated at them, and he throws a bunch of poisonous snakes into the desert because, you know, he's such an easy guy to get along with. So he throws a bunch of poisonous snakes in there, and they go around biting all these people who are, you know, not being faithful. And so all the people who you know, doubting Moses are starting to freak out because they keep getting bit by all these poisonous snakes. And so they finally call on Moses to ask God to be like, you know, call off the poisonous snakes. They'll behave, just call off the poisonous snakes. And God says to Moses to build a staff with a bronze snake on it, and that if people will come and look at the snake, then they'll be immune to the snake's poison, or the snakes will stop biting them. I don't remember which. And it's a lovely story because it's another exposure story. Eh? It sort of means that if you're willing to gaze upon the thing that is most poison to you, or that you're most afraid of, that can help you overcome it. And that's sort of what this is a representation of, except it's more complex because this serpent's tail sort of stretches down into infinity. That's what that representation is. It's sort of the manifestation of the unknown right from the beginning of time and space. That's what that image represents. And that's sort of the problem of humanity in some sense. It's that, you know, there's an infinite number of troubles stemming from an infinite source. It's a remarkable representation, I think. You've heard about near-death experiences, I imagine, you know, the idea that people see the light at the end of the tunnel, and then, you know, when they get through the light, they see all their ancestors there, and something that vaguely resembles God, and, you know, and that's conditioned to some degree by their cultural background. But it's a very common experience, and this is actually a representation of that from a 12th to 13th century painting by Hieronymus Bosch. And this seems to be the sort of thing also that's characteristic of the shamanic experience post-reduction to skeleton. So the shaman dies, and then as a consequence of that, he ends up in a space that's characterized by the presence of the ancestral spirits, whatever that means. I mean, you can think about those as, like, each of you are embodiments of ancestral spirits, right? Because all the ideas you have, for example, none of them are your ideas, or virtually none of them. It's almost impossible to have an original idea. All the ideas you have are like the ghostly remnants of brilliant philosophers or theologians who've lived hundreds or thousands of years ago, and your whole head is populated by these things. And they're sort of embodied things because they tell you how to act. They're not just cold, dead ideas. And you're a mixture of all those things. And I don't know if the ancestral spirits that these visionaries encounter are like personified representations of the spirits that live inside their head or what they are. But part of the experience seems to be, what would you call it? It's like a rescuing of the dying father from the depths. How many of you have seen Pinocchio? Right, so you know the fundamental theme there, right? Pinocchio's a marionette, so anyone can manipulate him. And he's a wooden head, he's not awake, he's not conscious, he's not alive. And so he can be led astray in 15 different ways. And, finally his father disappears to go looking for him. And for reasons that aren't exactly clear, his father ends up inside a whale at the bottom of the ocean, which is, not the first place you'd think of looking for your father. But especially if you were a puppet and like a cricket was leading you around, which is all absurd stuff. Although one thing I could tell you is, what's the cricket's name? Yeah, what's the initials? Right, so fake, right? Yeah, Jiminy Cricket is Southern U.S. slang for Jesus Christ. And, the animators picked that up as a joke. But it's not a joke, because of course the cricket serves as the conscience and the spiritual guide on this quest vision. And it's the cricket that leads the puppet deep underground. Actually, it's into the ocean, to the deepest depths of despair, right, and death, like a shamanic disintegration, to find the spirit of his father. And why does he need that? Well, it's because without incorporating the spirit of his father or his forefathers, he can't be real. And that's because human beings, and puppets apparently, we're cultural creatures. It's not like there's you and there's your culture. It's like you are your culture. And so you're either the embodiment of your culture, fleshed out and made whole, or you're just a fragmentary thing and you're only half alive. And worse than that, you can't cope with tragedy. I mean, the way that Pinocchio becomes real is he rescues his father from the whale, which is also a dragon, right? The whale's a dragon. How do you know that? What happens to the whale? He spits fire. Yeah, it's weird behavior for a whale, and it's because Pinocchio lights a fire inside him. But of course, that's how human beings have always escaped from chaos, is by using fire. So he's the master of fire. And that brings him up from the depths, and he has to rescue his father, and it actually kills him, right? His father says, no, let me drown. Save yourself. And Pinocchio doesn't, and he dies in the effort to bring him to shore. But then the blue fairy comes down and says, well, because you're such a good puppet, it's like, click, now you're awake. It's a remarkable story. It's an amazing movie. I mean, it has themes in it that are thousands and thousands of years old. Like the idea that the hero has to journey to the darkest depths to reclaim a treasure. The treasure can be lots of things. It can be the dead father. It can be a princess. It can be gold. It doesn't really matter. There's this idea that the thing you want most is to be found where you least want to look, which is a lovely little. That's an alchemical dictum, by the way, that was sort of reanimated by Jung. So, anyways, the idea in the shamanic visions is that past death, there's this opening up into the ancestral landscape, and that's the place where you can commune with, well, the ancestor gods, or maybe the spirit of the ancestors themselves, which is something like God.